Hello, everybody. James here, episode 7 of the franchise University with Shane Douglas. There he is, the man himself. Give us the symbol of excellence, the new symbol of excellence in ECW especially.
And the new old symbol.
Yes. To explain to everybody, we are going to be doing fan questions once more, but you'll be wondering, well, how can I write in for fan questions? Great question, you can't. So, these are all questions submitted 9 months ago, actually, as we filmed this. And we had so many questions for Shane on an old WSI interview that I thought, well, it'd be a shame to waste them all. So I've got more of those. And then the next time we do a fan question thing, we will ask for your questions for fresh input. And I'll think of an email, think of a way of doing it and all that kind of thing. But for now, we have maybe about, 50 minutes worth of questions for the franchise himself. And the first one is from me, because I really want to know your opinion of it. Last year, Paul Heyman was doing a show for Inside the Ropes when a fan kept yelling and calling out Chris Benoit as his favourite wrestler and his boy, quote unquote. Paul eventually bites on this because he keeps hearing it and then he can't let it go. And then he says the following: "You can admire his work, he being Chris Benoit, all you want, but I'll give you my take on it. Since you want to keep on yelling out, my boy. 3 people died in that house that night. I don't care about CTE. 3 people died in that house that night. Only one person had the choice behind it. The other 2 didn't have a choice to die. So if that's your boy, fuck you." As somebody with a medical background, we understand CTE a lot better these days than we did so many years beforehand. Some fans out there will immediately go to, Benoit was entirely incapable of making a rational decision, and then we'll blame the CTE. And there's plenty of evidence to support that he did have CTE. Others will say, I think the expression was something like an 80-year-old Alzheimer's patient that his brain resembled. But then a lot of 80-year-old Alzheimer's patients don't kill either. So it's a very, very interesting... there's no answer to it, but what is your opinion on Paul's response specifically there?
Paul's brilliant on the mic. Very bright guy. So there's no pretty well-known rule of the universe is like, don't go to the comedy club and try to razz the comedian because they've done this 10,000 times and they're gonna bury your ass, right? Paul, no different. And my take on Paul saying that I agree with everything he said. Chris was a great guy that I knew when I knew him. When I remember getting the phone call from Donna Seaman, sweet lady, but good friend. She was involved in the WCW office, and she was crying when I picked the phone up. And that's how I'd learned the information. And I thought, that can't be right. I mean, there's got to be something more to this, because I had seen Chris multiple times, including having a Bowie knife pulled on him and put up in his face. And he always sat there with the little grin on his face, and you almost wanted to feel for a pulse. Nightly, the 3 of us, me, Chris, and Dean, would go out, and without fail, almost every single night, some drunk moron in the bar would come over to the table and start flapping his gums. And Chris and Dean both knew I was a hothead. And before I could react, Chris would jump right up, put his arm around the guy, and buy you a drink, and walk him away from the table. It may not have been every single night, but it was quite often that would happen. That's the Chris that I knew. And so, and I don't mean to detract in any way from the heinous acts that happened that night or that weekend. But if Chris would have called me 5 minutes before Donna called me and said, "Hey, put your kid on a plane, let him come down and visit Daniel," I had no reason to even think twice about it. Would have never even entered my brain. So, when you have somebody in the audience, and I agree with Paul's comment, you can admire his work because he was a phenomenal in-ring worker, and he worked hard at it. Just the little things, an Irish whip. Watch how Chris Benoit did an Irish whip. Watch how each time when he would do the flying headbutt, the perfectly stiff body, and everything, like much like Brett, because again, I think learning up in that school initially, that style of those Canadian wrestlers, like the Japanese wrestlers have hallmarks that they're phenomenal at. The Mexican wrestlers, same thing. The Canadian wrestlers, and you can see these things in Chris. I don't think any of us that knew him best had ever seen anything that would have made us think that any of that was even possible. Now, all that said, and please don't anybody try to ascribe more to this than what the words coming out of my mouth. We've all been in marriages or relationships where you're quite angry at each other for whatever reason. In my case, it was I left the underwear on the floor when I went to take a shower, stupid shit like that. But there are times in every relationship where you're at each other's throats. Thankfully, the vast majority of those end up in each walking their a different way and either divorcing or going and having a drink or smoke or whatever and come back and you start back over again. That was an aberration. And I agree with Paul that I don't prescribe it to just, well, it's CT, so free pass, and that's that. This is a lot more convoluted of a topic. I mean, we're talking about 3 human beings dead. And like that to me is like an, oh my effing God. Like this is like as bad as it gets, right? Unless 4. I mean, that's the only way to make it worse. I'm heartbroken that in that moment or those moments that weekend, as many people as Chris knew and was close with, that he didn't feel that he could pick a phone up and talk to somebody, walk outside and punch a brick wall, run this car into a tree, whatever, to let that tension out someplace else. For anybody that's been in a marriage or a close relationship like that, we've all had the time where you want to just react. And I think the CT probably is responsible for that. I don't buy that he was just this blank drone walking through his house, killing his wife and his kid and then himself and doing all these things. But there is the steroid usage that, when people hear the phrase roid rage, I'd seen it quite often in my business. Typically roid rage is you flip out over the dumbest of stuff for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. Then you walk away almost embarrassed that you lost your temper like that. And over something that trivial. So again, hopefully not having CTE, I think it'd be impossible for me to put myself into that mindset. But I think once that bottle started tipping, like once that temper started rolling, the CT probably made it less capable for him to pull back on that. And I have no doubt that he loved Daniel unconditionally. It's foreign to me because I cannot imagine in any way, shape, or form ever hurting my boys. And the Chris that I knew, like I described earlier, you can see an incongruity there. There's something, those 2 trains are passing in the night. Those 2 things don't match up. So clearly something was off. If you'd have told me Chris would have killed his dog, I'd have been shocked by that, let alone his wife and his son. I think D. Malenko put it best when he said, anybody that knew what happened in that room is gone, or in that house is gone. And so we're always going to be left to guess. It breaks my heart that that's, a stain on Chris's legacy because he was such a great wrestler. But everything Paul said was spot on. It's one thing for a fan to be able to separate these things and say, yeah, but he's a great wrestler. Yeah, he was. And unfortunately in life, everything is like this. Like I say, the vast majority of life takes place in that gray area between the black and white. And, every one of us is capable of making a mistake. This week there's this awful video of these young kids, 17 years old, mowing this guy down and killing him and then laughing about it. What are we creating in society? I think with Chris, like the Chris that I knew, couldn't imagine it. In hindsight, now I have this image in my head also of this horrible thing happening. And Paul, again, his comment, 2 people didn't have a choice in that. And, if you want to off yourself, please call somebody, reach out to somebody if you ever have that feeling. But if your plan is to go out and being so mad, like the school shooter in Tennessee, right? Apparently angry because somebody in that school allegedly did something to her or him, depending, then go and shoot that guy. Don't go and shoot all these innocent kids and teachers. But But again, I think you see the disconnect in the human brain. To me, the idea of killing anybody for any reason seems pretty like would wreck me. Like even if it was by accident, if I wrecked a car and somebody else died in the other car, that would just destroy me. So the idea of saying I'm just going to go out and do it to do it, or get so angry that I'm going to kill my kid or boys or my ex-wife, it is so hard for us that knew Chris to put those things together. But in this isolated moment, like, first of all, Paul's brilliant on the microphone, right? So he's not going to let some heckler throw him off what he's got to do. And because it's so obvious what's being done, he has to address it. And he addressed it the only way he could publicly. If Paul would have said, and I'm probably sure that you're going to probably get some people writing in, hey, Shane shouldn't have said that. I'm giving my honest opinion on things. None of it should have happened. But it did. And we know human beings do awful things, and sometimes inexplicably. And, for the people left behind, I can only imagine the family. But for those of us that knew him, it just doesn't fit. It would be like, Moose, as big and gregarious as he is, I'd be like saying, hey, did you hear Moose killed his wife and daughters today? I'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? What? It just does, you can't see it. The same with Chris. And I'm not giving a buy or anything to it. It's just one of those mysteries that's going to forever fester, that there's never going to be a conclusion to. Paul handled that the only way he could handle it, and deftly at that. What do you say to it? Yeah, Chris was a great wrestler. Hooray. But then there's this 9 million pound elephant in the room, right? It's, but kudos to Paul. And I don't think anything he said there was necessarily degrading to Chris's career. Like, he was addressing what happened, and really in front of an audience and being televised, recorded. What could you say? That's I don't think he could handle that any better than he did. A+ from the franchise.
Yeah. I appreciate that you've given a nuanced answer, because it deserves a nuanced answer. But there's so many people out there who'll say, no, it was definitely the CTE, or no, it was definitely this, or definitely that. And it's like, guess what? Yeah. Life just isn't that. Especially in a situation like this, life just doesn't, or an answer just doesn't fit nicely, neatly into a little box, and then you can say that's the definite reason. So I always appreciate a nuanced answer to it. We will move on.
Is what it's what the human brain wants, right? We want it to be a nice, neat answer with a bow on it. So it's just an aberration and a horrific thing, and forever question mark. By the way, I just I keep stepping on you. For the people that are saying this was CT and that's it, and blah, it's a pass, whatever. I'd be curious how many of them have CTE. How many of them have been around people with CTE? I've read an awful lot about it. And there are times I look at it and, like, when I can't find my car keys and they're like, oh shit, chair shots, and then, or somebody's name. The fact of the matter is, by the time you hit the ripe old age of 39, like I am, is that you got a lot of bullshit up there, a lot of junk that's just sort of floating around, the bills due tomorrow or whatever. It's I would ask anybody out there just to please take a step back from it and understand that 3 human beings are gone. Again, 2 without their consent or desire, and just a horrific chapter in our business that should never happen, yet it does happen. So hopefully I pray for everybody out there that it doesn't happen to them or their families.
Now, obviously, that was the heaviest question that I've got for you. We're going to go for more frivolous stuff from now on.
Good.
Boss Ross, 33, has said, would love Shane's thoughts on the Revolution group in WCW and how it came about. I remember watching the Revolution faction, and off the top of my head, you guys were never really mixed up with many people in the main event. Revolution, how did it actually start? We know how it ended, but how did it come about?
So when we had gone, and it's funny you ask that, because I was just asked this question yesterday from a lawyer friend of mine. He's gone back and started watching ECW from the beginning and binge watched from beginning to end. He's now on WCW, and he threw the question at me, whose idea was it to put the triple threat back together in WCW? And I was sitting in my car at the coffee shop, and I thought, I had to Google it. I didn't remember us being together. We were, but they didn't call us triple threat in typical WCW. Why would you want to do that millions of people know.
Oh, before I forget, I'm sorry to interrupt, Shane, but we actually found out, or I actually found out, that you, Chris Candido, and Bam Bam Bigelow wrestled one match as a trio in WCW. I just wanted to let you know that. So it did actually happen, because we were arguing about this last month. No, you weren't called the Triple Threat. Of course you weren't. Yes. Why would you be? But yes, I'm sorry. I derailed you. Carry on.
No, I'm glad you threw that in, because I wasn't sure if it was. I just, when I pulled it up and saw it, I was like, completely gone from my memory. Like, no recollection of that at all. Then as I like was reading it and stuff, like, then it starts creeping back in a little bit. Again, as I was looking around the dressing room there, I obviously had an affinity for all these guys: Chris, Bam Bam, Dean, Chris Benoit. We had done stuff together. We've been friends. We had traveled together. We had worked together. And, you know, when you work with people that you enjoy working with, makes this business a whole lot funner and more manageable. When you're with somebody you don't like, it's drudgery to go on the road. It really is just drudgery. And but as I was looking around, like there was always this overcast pall of the Four Horsemen over WCW, whether they were together or not at that moment. But there was always this pall, and I thought WCW needs something to not to erase that, or it's the Four Horsemen, the most iconic stable of all time, but they need something now to transcend this Millionaire Club and New Blood, and you know, to get this to a head and push it into a certain direction. And I strongly believe then, and I still believe in hindsight, that it was time to move beyond. Not that you're firing Flair or Hogan or just putting them out to pasture. They should have become the elder statesmen, excuse me, in our dressing room. And they're always going to be Hulk Hogan. They're always going to be Ric Flair. They're always going to be whoever. But by this time, it was time to move on. And it was my initial inclination to either reassemble that. And then Vince Russo came up with the idea for the Four to make it different, because there was some less than palatable idea to mimic ECW. And, you know, and Perry being there, you know, Perry, I was a huge fan of Perry's work, and Perry, you know, Perry was a good guy to hang out with. And so he came up with the idea of the Revolution.
He being Perry.
No, Dean, Vince Russo.
I'm sorry. Carry on.
Yeah. So yeah, I forget what building it was. We were in the commissary in the CAF, and he came in. When you go back to that time, and I think a lot of times since, when you hear Vince Russo say "my boys" or "my guys," he's talking about me, Dean, Chris, and Perry. Pulled us together and, you know, gave us the idea. I don't recall if he had the name Revolution, but he certainly came up with the idea of putting the four of us together. And I had been thinking about it and pushing the idea for the Triple Threat to be put back together, whether it was me, Chris, and Bammer, which I don't think the three of us were all there at the same time, except for that, like a brief moment that Chris came in. Bammer was there when I got there, left shortly after that. Then Chris came in like right around. There was just a brief overcross of all those names. And again, I don't recall if Russo came up with the idea for the name, the Revolution, but I do recall the night in Michigan at the Palace, the Auburn Hills Palace, when they had us go to the ring and feign that we were going to burn the American flag, which of course we would have never been able to do after the 9/11. Through that, they had Jim Duggan come down. We got heat on him with a rubber board of all things. Mm-hmm. Jesus. And then Brett came down, and that was sort of setting up for Chris and Brett to have their matches. And, you know, as being the one guy that had been, you know, a top card heel, you could sense the heat in the building that night was palpable. And I said to the guys in the dressing room, like, hey, if you need to go to the store, don't go alone. Like, if we're going to the bar, the store, whatever, we need to stick together, because if we separate out, the Wolfpack will get us. And it was that kind of heat. And when we came back, the first reaction that I got backstage was J.J. Dillon. He goes, "That was fucking disgusting." And I said, well, you should have said something in the booking meeting. But it was major heat in the building, and it would have been money drawing heat if, capital letters, if WCW had fostered it properly, had gotten it over properly, had put the right heat on it. The fact that WCW's low-hanging fruit was for us to threaten to burn the American flag. And then to save a Canadian out, to save it from a Canadian, seemed like just sort of hodgepodge all over the place, right? And but the heat was there. If you watch me in the ring at that time, I am constantly gauging, like I was taught, sight and sound. You're listening first and then looking second to verify what it is you're hearing. And the heat in the building that night was money drawing heat, was the kind of heat that people would have paid to see us get our asses kicked. And they would very shortly after that, I don't know if they got scared. I don't know if politics played into it, but right after that, it started being like the idea of maneuvering into Perry being in a dress, and it was just all this like all over. Like somebody come up with an idea, hey, let's do it to these guys, or let's do me and the Viagra on a pole match, and just stuff like that. That to me was like cheesy, right, and not heat, cheesy.
Oh, goodness me, we're going to be getting to that at some point. Further on down the line of the podcast, we're going to pick some.
It's a really stiff subject, I tell you.
I know, yeah. It's going to be hard to talk about, Shane, let me tell you. So I'd actually started reading out my own notes, actually, after this question. I remember the Revolution, for one, lasting longer than it did. It really was only a few months, I think. But you weren't really mixed up with any of the top guys. You were just saying before, hey, we need to be moving Rick and Hogan and, into like legacy positions.
Yes.
And I'm trying to think off the top of my head. The only real main eventers that you seem to be mixed up with was Kurt Hennig. And maybe Flair at some point, I don't know. But the only other thing is that like we've got you in the Revolution. Mm-hmm. And what's your greatest asset as a wrestler? Your promos.
Promo, yeah.
Exactly. So, who better to do all the promos and talking for the Revolution than Dean Malenko? Why was it Dean who always seemed to be doing the speaking for the group at some point?
No, I don't recall that. They wanted us to start the promo backstage and carry that to the ring. I don't know, to abbreviate time or just to make it different. But the one night little side comment to that is I would start it off in the back, and as we're walking through them, would hand the mic over. And I think they wanted to sort of spread it out. So it wasn't just a Flair talking for four horsemen like the Horsemen did. Like Flair would do the majority, right? But then Tully would say his matter-of-fact piece, and then Arn would give you the look over the glasses and give you his blah, 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 raise his voice a hair. They were four very different styles. My guess is probably more that than anything, that they didn't want to just be, one specific flavor. But how that would, blur in like one town to the next. We were backstage, I forget where, the night before we were in Chicago. And so I grabbed the mic, they hit our music, and hey, Chicago. And Dean Malenko said, he turned around and said, it's Columbus, you dumb shit. Something like that. And I looked at him like, I was like, hey, they piped that in. I didn't say that. It was, you just started losing sight of where you were. But I do think that it was probably, I should say, no. I think it was probably that they wanted to have more of that Horseman flavor. Because if you remember that like in this time frame, there was the new Horseman, and then there was this, and then there was the old Horsemen were back, and then they were gone, and then it was just this sort of trying to figure a way to re-enter that, to reintroduce that. And I think the major problem for us was that we, on that booking committee, none of us had any allies on the booking committee, which, should have been whoever the boss was at that time stepping in, because there was a lot of money being paid out for the four of us to recoup investment. But it was clear, like, within within a few weeks or a month or so, we were all sent home. After we had made, our voices clear to I always forget, Bill Banks or Bill Bush, the Bill that was in charge. We made it clear to him that, look, there's obvious heat between Benoit and Kevin for obvious reasons. And there's obvious heat between me and Flair. And there was all this crossing heat that, was always nipping at this situation, whatever situation any of us were in. And ultimately that flushed WCW's and Time Warner then their investment in the four of us, which is a pretty big outlay of, a couple $1 million per year for the four of us. And, weren't recouping it. Ironically, the answer from the people that were doing that was to put us on camera, so like we get rid of these guys and we'll go out there and we'll become that. The only time that I remember in that whole time frame of me having any kind of main event caliber matches was the match in Kansas City with Flair a month after Owen had fallen to his death. And if you remember that match, there was this cavalcade of, people being involved. First David, and then Vince Russo, and then Sting. And there was all this other stuff that so detracted from the match that in hindsight, I would learn that Flair had derailed it with politics. And what, again, a detriment, the Time Warner was stupid enough to listen to that. For whatever his reasoning, it's, we'd all love to be able to say, man, I could be Shane Douglas of 1995, 6, and 7. I can't. I'm a hair older and a lot ackier. And certainly aware of what I'm capable of in the ring and not capable of. These guys, I would argue, far outstayed their welcome, far past their shelf life, and did detriment to their own legacies in doing so. And at this time, again, like if you look at the fact that Ivy League management schools, MBA courses, were being taught on what not to do in management on WCW, I think is the epitaph that really underscores all that was wrong in WCW at the time.
Now, I said that the first question was the last of the heavy questions, and I'd completely forgotten this one, so it's another one. I don't know if you were in ECW this time, though, sort of touch and go, really, before you left. Archer Sue says, how did Shane Douglas, the roster, and the crowd react to the incident in ECW when the dipshit in the crowd interrupted the 10-bell salute in honour for the recently departed Rick Rude? What was the mood of the roster and the crowd after that happened, and did it affect the rest of the show? Now, were you still in ECW at this time?
I believe so.
So this would have been April 99, this would have been around that time?
Ooh, boy, the dates you got me on. It was, I want to say, and I might be wrong on this. I know someone's going to write it and I have it wrong. I want to say it was August of that year. It was like leading into fall time that I left. The bellwether would be the Breaking the Barrier show at the ECW Arena. That was technically my last day with ECW. So whatever the date is on that.
I'm currently searching for this. The last match I've got for you here is on the 15th of April 1999 against Just Incredible, and Rude died 5 days later. So we will presume that you weren't there for that incident then, shall we?
Yeah. I do remember there was some, I can't remember if it was Rude's or Tommy Dreamer's grandfather. Where there was
Tommy Dreamer's grandfather. Boo!
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. But there was a I don't know if I saw it on tape or I was there, but I remember being aware of it. I don't think at that moment, I think people were like, "Hey, shut the fuck up," It's like a respect thing. But with the ECW audience, that you came to expect the unexpected, and you really can't turn that on or off. You can't say, okay, but in these type of cases, don't react. We always knew. I've often called the audience as being the sixth man on the bench for ECW. We knew that we could get a reaction from them. That if we were to go out and throw somebody down with a halo, that was going to get a reaction, a little more than we wanted or thought would come, but we knew we'd have that reaction. So, I think initially my guess would have been, whether I was there or not, would have been that, like, hey, shut the fuck up. This is a respect thing. And, if the person remained, my guess would be that Atlas would have reacted, or, somebody in the building would have reacted to quiet the person down. But I'm sure there would have been other people like Sabu who really take, the respect factor of the industry, as paramount. It would have been hot. But yeah, it's one of those things that when you said it, I'm like, I'm aware of it in my head, and I don't recall if I was there specifically or not. But I was in ECW technically the day of the Break the Barrier show at the arena, and ECW was in Poughkeepsie that night. So that would have been my technical last day with ECW.
Okay, then, Internet sleuths, find out which date that was. We're going to move on. Luke Warmstand Houston. When you were in TNA, what was the atmosphere like when TNA was transitioning from weekly pay-per-views into weekly Impact TV shows? Did you think TNA was growing into something special, or did you view TNA as just another wrestling promotion?
No, there was a sense that we were getting some momentum. When Bob Carter came in and we started doing the Wednesday night pay-per-views, and then we would jump on the private plane, his private plane or chartered plane, and fly from Nashville down to Orlando and do the TNA tapings at the Impact Zone. There was a sense that there was momentum in the company, and we had a fairly strong entity with the X division. I remember being involved in the booking committee and the booking meetings. That was like a go-to for us. If we needed like something good in the ring, we would grab something from the X division. And then shortly after that, I don't know whose decision it was, but they started blurring that line between the X division and the other people. And then suddenly it became, okay, AJ Styles versus Kevin Nash, or and we stopped talking about the X division. So we had sort of splayed ourselves and jettisoning the one asset that we had that we could have built on. And at the time in the business, it was starting to go towards these smaller guys that were a lot more acrobatic and what today would be called spot monkey. There was a trajectory towards that in the industry. The fans had grown tired of the lumbering big guys, tackle, no sell it, that kind of thing. And suddenly here comes these guys that are really talented. And, I know, like, working specifically with AJ was very diligent about picking it up and getting it to understand it. Really open to the idea of learning. And we jettisoned that. So yeah, at the time we started going to Orlando to shoot the televisions there. There was a sense that here we are suddenly we have two buildings on the lot, right? We have the studio and then the building where the green room and the production meetings all were, and everybody's offices. And there was a feeling that, okay, the little engine starting to chug up the hill, but having been involved with a company like that with ECW and this little engine that could and just kept going, it was pretty clear that in short order, that with Dixie there was always this impediment, an unnecessary impediment. With all due respect to everybody outside of our business, I know what I know because I've been in this business for 40 years. I've been a fan of it for a lot longer than that, and been a diligent student of it while I've been in it. And there's still stuff I learn. So the idea that we can hire some 20-year-old great writer of sitcoms to become a writer for wrestling, the same thing back would be saying, well, why am I sitting here talking with you? I should be in Hollywood writing sitcoms because I've been a great wrestler for 40 years. It's not interchangeable parts. To understand the nuances of, being involved in the ring and, getting kicked in the head or slammed on your head or something, you still have to get the match to a finish, understanding how to get a character over, all those things that I talked about Funk earlier in the episode 2 weeks ago. I think, comes up now is like we're seeing all of this sort of blah be put into it. And the first day I met Dixie, she followed me into the green room and she said, my father's really impressed with your resume. And she starts reciting it to me. And she said, how impressed her father was with me. And if I were to give him one piece of advice, what would it be? And, she had just been introduced to us at the production meeting. Dixie has a very professional way about her. You could tell she's been well bred that way, right? So she knows the right things to say, and she's a very professional person. And then I'm thinking, well, whoa, one piece of advice. God, I can give him a million pieces of advice. And then it struck me, not even paying attention as I'm changing to go do my on screens, that the show has started, and she's standing in the doorway, and the monitor's behind me. So my back is to the monitor. And I said to her, well, if I were to tell just one piece of advice, I could give him a million pieces of advice, but I would tell him to in no way, shape, or form intend or try to be WWF 2, WWF Junior, WWF Light, B, TNA 1. And then I made to her the mistake of invoking ECW. I said, like ECW did. We went for the 18 to 49 male demographic and we owned them. Her response to me was, why would we want to copy ECW? After all, it failed. Before I could say anything to her, something happened in the ring that the show that had now started, the monitor behind me, and the fans started chanting in the impact zone, ECW, ECW. So my answer to her was I stepped back and looked at the monitor and looked back at her, back at the monitor and back at her. Like, are you getting the irony of this? Like, you say ECW, we failed on a business level, but clearly the product, even now, still holds sway. And so clearly we did something right. Right from the time of her inception into the company, her insertion into the company, her brother Todd, who was a fairly smart guy, pretty bright guy, as I recall, and Bob, who was obviously a bright guy, and very down to earth. Not at all like the other billionaires I'd met before that. Seemed to me that Todd and Bob really had the desire and the wherewithal to do the right thing. Dixie, however, came in, and it was always this plan to do A, B, and C. And she would say, well, I think we should do CBA. And we'd do CBA. And then I would explain to her why it's not going to work. Like we have to do this. If we're going to go that direction, we're going to have to put these intervening steps in to make this make sense. And this went on for the better part of 2 or 3 years, where she would ask my advice. I would give it. She wouldn't take it. In 2 weeks, we'd come back and I would get, hey, you were right. How do we fix it? I would tell her that, my opinion of what we should do. And she wouldn't do that. And then 2 weeks, say, hey, you were right again. We should do it. Now what? And this went on for a couple of years, to the point where, just to entertain myself, one time I said to her something like, I really think we should put AJ out there like a pink tutu and just, see what he does with it. And she's like, listen, I'm telling her like the secrets of the universe. Here comes my Albert Einstein impression. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, like, I'm pulling your leg, lady. And she just didn't get it. And not shortly after I left, there were always times with Dixie that we would need somebody to be the representative, the face of the company. If Terry Taylor went out, if I went out, Scott D'Amore went out, whatever, we were all sort of seen as wrestlers in the company. And she would always put her finger up like that and say, I'm management, not on-air talent. And we'd never do it. And so we'd have to make up some hodgepodge of like some other way to get where we needed to be. So a month or two after I leave, I see her in the ring with Hogan doing a crab and taking the 3D through a table. And somebody's been bitten by the TV bug, right? Suddenly we're not so management anymore. And again, I think the shame of it is Bob had put a boatload of money, hundreds of millions of dollars into that, and Spike too. And the end result was nothing to show for it. Now you could argue that TNA is still floating along, and that's because of the other people from Canada that came in and all of that. My contention would be that with the talent we had come through there, and the people we had working in the office, Terry Taylor and Jeff Jarrett and me, and so many others, Dutch, Vince, there was an awful lot of acumen in that production room, that it failed in spite of that. And so you have to then look for the obvious culprit. Is somebody not doing the right thing here? And that one person would be Dixie, the one person that could make those decisions. And like she said to me one time, I had gone and gotten Scott D'Amore had come to me and he said, hey, Bob wants you to start finding buildings like in and around Pittsburgh. As you've run Pittsburgh and Ohio, and you'll find some buildings. I found a phenomenal building in Chester, West Virginia. It's a casino, where ESPN at the time was doing on ESPN2. They were doing boxing every Tuesday night live. So this incredible arena, lights, sound, everything tailor-made. They wanted us to pay $1,000 to rent the building, but that included the building, rooms for all the crew, rooms for all the talent, the venue, the lights, the sound, everything we would need $1,000. And all they wanted from us was to make 2 wrestlers available every couple hours to sit in the casino and sign autographs, take pictures. I took it to Dixie after working on this and pulling a lot of favors in. I take it to Dixie and she said, I'll give that to, and she said a name that I'd never heard. I said, who's that? She goes, it's the head of our live events. It's our live events coordinator. I said, we have a live events coordinator? Like, we had never done a live event. And so I hand this stuff off. I find this guy and I hand it off to him. I never heard another word. Nick Busick, by the way, who passed away a few years ago, Blacktop Bully. He was working with the guy that owned the casino and got this for us. And so you can imagine a few months later, whenever I see him and I say, hey, how's that going? He's going, I don't know, never heard from anybody. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I mean, this is a freebie as much as a freebie goes. And, and I'm sure there were a million incidences like that in spite of themselves, they just couldn't get over, in spite of the talent, in spite of the money, in spite of all the things like getting buildings, incredible buildings for $1,000. In spite of all that, it still failed. And that to me, I think is just a sin, from the money that Bob and Spike put in, and for the fervor the fans put in, for the effort the wrestlers put in, for the effort we put in the production meeting. It failed in spite of all that. And that's WCW Redux.
When I interviewed Eric Bischoff, he said very much the same thing. He said one of the real problems with TNA was the back office staff and just the cross wires and just some people who he just said should never have been there. But he didn't give any names, so I can't really. Similarly with, I want to bring up one thing with Dutch just to follow up. And one thing he said that was really frustrating to book TNA with is that some of the talent eventually realised that instead of going to Dutch or Jim Cornette or Vince Russo or Terry Taylor or whoever, they could go to Dixie. And then all of a sudden, Dixie would turn and was like, hey, I've got this great idea. Why don't we push so-and-so? And then, because it's Dixie coming from Dixie now, the booking committee then has to work that into the storyline. But we'll leave that for there because...
there is one tagline, if I can throw it. I won't use names.
Okay.
But I've had 3 wrestlers since I was there and left come to me at different times and say that they were put in very uncomfortable situations with Dixie. And all I can tell you is this was told to me by 3 different people at 3 different times, independently of each other. I had never seen that. I had never even heard any of that when I was there. But I sort of kept to myself. We'd have the production meeting the night before in Jeff's suite, and that would be about the only time you'd see or hear like any real interaction with anybody. And after that, people would either like stay there and party or go off their way. I like being by myself, and so I'd be down in my room watching HBO or ESPN, and then we would go to the building, and we'd have these meetings where sort of like playing off of what was decided last night, but there might be a change here or there. I remember one time there was an interaction, and this is why I wouldn't open my mouth in the production meetings. There was a match with AJ Styles, and the argument was like, let's send him out first. And I thought, well, he's the bigger star in this match, and we're putting him over. So let the heel go first and get some heat. And then send, well, Taylor and I used to sit right next to each other. And most times we'd play tic-tac-toe there was a paper on the table, that kind of thing. And Terry, likes to put his 2 cents in, and he raised it and he said, I think we should send the heel first. And Jeff was sitting at the head of the table, and he went, like he's looking at the paper and thinking it through, and he goes, no, let's leave it like it is. And from now on, why don't you keep your, did he say fucking opinion or your stupid opinion? Something like that to yourself. And I'm kicking him under the table like, dude, like you got to respond to that. Like you can't just let him say that. And Terry didn't. And much to my chagrin after that, Terry would become very much a political beast after that. I'd confided some things and I'm like, this is where my marriage is going south and everything. And I thought I'd known Terry for years at this point and confided some things into Terry that I later found out like went into the whole decision of like letting me go. So, it's mixed feelings with TNA, because I honestly believe that TNA had, money's the biggest issue with wrestling. It's an incredibly expensive endeavor to start. So when you have that, and you have the talent, and you have the interest of the fans. It's like I said earlier, it's a sin that you can't make that work, right? And it just like every time you get to a taping, like when Dusty was there were brief flickers of, hey, we're getting it chugging in the right direction. And, then he would be gone. And then Russo would be back for the second or third or fourth time. And then Bischoff would be there. And then there was it just had so much of a WCW all over again feel to it. And it's, I think one of those episodes in wrestling history that, those of us in the business, whether it be at the production meetings or in the ring or the dressing room, sitting there and scratching our head and going like, God, like we should all still be working for WCW technically.
Mm-hmm.
All he's had to do was the right thing. That should have just always chugged along. And, just those things that happen, you look at, and the fact that you still see those things happening today in the business, you go, okay, like is nobody paying attention to the history? Is nobody watching? We just saw, I know this has nothing to do with the question, but we just saw Fox jettison, right? And what was an NBC Universal picked it up. And Fox's publicly stated reason was we expected for all this money, we were going to get this many viewers per week. We never came close to it. So this deal, a lot smaller than the original one. I would guess that people on the inside, even though it's a $1 billion deal, are going, yeah, but it's half as much as the last one. And where are we going to be at the end of this contract? That it's the arc of that is making the wrong trajectory. So, all of these things, there's ample history to in companies like ECW and companies like TNA. It's there in the record books. Just pay attention to it and do something different. Apparently, that's impossible.
It's the definition of madness is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You said something at the beginning of when you were talking about in the last 5 minutes or so. And you said...
droning on.
No, 3 wrestlers came to you and said the same thing, that that Dixie Carter put them in an uncomfortable position.
I don't think I said Dixie. I said we're put in uncomfortable situations. I'm sorry.
Okay, so exactly what did you say? Because I've already misquoted you there. And exactly what do you mean? Three
wrestlers at different times, independently of each other, had come to me and told me that they were put into very uncomfortable situations. Like situations that were tantamount to sexual harassment. If you don't have a choice in the decision of this, I'll do this or I'll do that, or I won't do this or do that. To me, that's the very definition of sexual harassment. My power, my job, I can derail yours if you don't do this for me.
Mm-hmm. These are all male.
So fans can
male.
Yes.
Yes.
So the fans, and there's again a lot of information out there on this. The fans can put those pieces together as they want.
Okay.
We'll leave it cryptic.
Yeah, we'll have to. Apparently, I threw out someone's name there. I'm not editing it out. Okay. Next one is I could barely.
Oh no, you got to leave that in. If my screw up stays in.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, hey, listen. I don't know if you implied it or not, but I certainly inferred it. So hey, that's what it is. Next one is named. It's just a bunch of letters. When did you realise that WCW was WC done? So the day that you knew that WCW was doomed.
The night that it aired. I was at home. I was in the cast with a broken trapezium bone, and I sit down and turn the TV on. And a lot of times, I don't know how people are out there, but me, I got sort of like my thumb just sort of like pushes buttons, and sometimes it's the right button, sometimes it's not. So I sit down and I click onto our show, and the show starts. So I'm sitting there for a second, not really paying attention. I'm going, wait, this is WWF. Click over it. WWF. Something wrong with this remote. It literally took like 5 minutes. I'm thinking, there's something damn wrong with the television. Like, I keep like banging, thinking batteries are bad or something. So I'm jostling the remote around and punching the number in. The hell? And I finally went like, wait a second. Because if you remember, for the fans that may not remember this, not long before this, there was a rumor that circulated that WWF was buying us. And like that, in short order, like it was like, oh, that's not true. That's not true. That's bullshit. And so like, it was like one of those things where it took my brain a couple of minutes to go like, wait a second, I'm on the right number and it's the holy shit. And all of a sudden the phone starts boom, boom, but people start calling each other, right? So I was at home watching. And I remember like it was like a meteorite falling on your head. Like, holy shit. And my initial thought, again, shows you, my faith in government, right, was that they're now monopolizing the industry. And so surely regulators are going to step in here, right? I've been paying attention to the government lately. So, it was, I think on paper they had Shane was the owner of WCW and Vince owned WWF. The net result of that was it put thousands of wrestlers, not just in the two big feds, but across the country. Because by this time now, the smaller ones that were still hanging on at that point knew they couldn't compete against these two juggernauts. The industry had become bipolar at that point. And so it put an awful lot of people out. And it, I think, seriously hampered the product that was being put out by both companies. And, it became this just sort of, okay, let's catch up with the Joneses, right? So remember there was the brief moment when WCW was live and they would put out, okay, well, here's what's going to happen in that match. Well, that can backfire on you too, because if I say to you, hey, Mick Foley's wrestling Steve Austin and the finish is this, I would imagine a lot of wrestlers going, yeah, I like those guys. Let me flip over and see what that is, And there was a not so covert attempt by WCW to mimic or become WWF like. And I think that was really where WCW, because it had always been, in my time, from the time I could see it on television, wrestling into the business and then going there, that had always, between the two, they were sports entertainment and we were wrestling and giving the fans very different flavors. But once they started becoming more WWF like, I think that's where you thought, like, if you want sports entertainment, you might as well watch the sports entertainment company that does it exceedingly well. And there's vanilla and chocolate for a reason. Some like vanilla, some like chocolate. I'm a pistachio guy, so but to give those different flavors, and I think the net result, in spite of the fact that ECW failed long term with Paul's business stuff, the fact that the fans still chant it today was that product itself was successful. It had captured the attention. And to me, that's the big surprise. And I know I'm rambling on this. When you look at AEW, and I was just with Todd Gordon last week, and he verified for me that Tony Khan used to be at the shows, and like he was the only one that knew it, and like they were keeping an eye out for him and that kind of thing. And you would think that you would see some imprint of ECW on their product. Again, I think if you would mimic ECW, try to be ECW-like, you'd fail because it's become like legendary status now. But to me, the FTW, the tagline, the fuck the world attitude, like, hey, this is what the big companies are doing. This is our response back to it. And I don't see any of that in AEW. It seems very TNA Impactish to me, like following that trajectory, which was the WCW model to failure. So I would contend, like, try something different, because this clearly ain't garnering. It's never grown the audience. So.
Oh, you singing! Oh, tell you, we could. Do you know? I think one day we should actually do like an AEW show. We'll just watch an AEW show from front to back
and comment. Yeah,
and comment on the entire thing. We'll do that at some point in the future. Just briefly, just with the last WCW thing, did you get paid out for the rest of your contract when WCW folded?
Yeah, what was her name? Diana Myers, who was the lead counsel. Apparently, allegedly, the story that we'd always heard, and I'd heard it confirmed from quite a few people that were in the office at that time, she was angry that we knuckle-dragging Neanderthals were making more money than she was. And my comment to that then and now is, if you didn't like it, then there's nothing from stopping you to go join a wrestling school and learn it and come on up. And you might have a little different respect for the wrestlers at that point. I can count all the way to 20, but you have to let me take my shoes off first, but I can do it. It's infuriating to me. I mean, you heard me, a few episodes ago talking about Terry Funk. And I hope the respect from me to Terry Funk and the love came through in that episode, because he was brilliant at what he did. Hey, he didn't create the internet or cell phones or cured cancer, but boy, he entertained thousands, hundreds of millions of fans for decades. And there's something to that. I mean, the world needs, actors and comedians and all the rest of allow us to forget about that Twilight Zone out there for a little bit. So the fact that she would have this condescending, how dare you make more money than me with a law degree? Well, I was accepted to medical school and I stayed in wrestling. You know why? Because I loved wrestling more. I loved medicine, but I loved wrestling more. And that was my decision. I can hardly say, well, damn, the doctor shouldn't be able to make that much more money than me. I had every right to be a doctor if I wanted to be a doctor. And so she played hardball for about a month where I'll date myself. I had a fax machine in my office and I got faxed over a release form, and she's telling me I have to sign this. I said, well, remind me where I requested this, Diana, and remind me why I have to sign anything. The last I checked, my lawyer tells me yes or no. That's, where my decision comes from. And they try to play hardball. Well, then we're going to this and we're going to that. And about a month in, I was on a conference call. My lawyer, Eric Weissenberger, who's now a judge in Norwalk, Ohio. He did all my legal work for me. And we had been friends since 1982. So he was well aware of my career and, my accomplishments and my failures and all of it. He knew all of it. And so he had a conference call with Diana, but he didn't tell her it was a conference call. He said, I don't want you to say anything. You just listen. And so he called her and he said to her, I've looked it over and the contract is clear. If you have something in writing that my client requested this, I'd like to see it. But barring that, if you don't start paying him by Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever the day the checks went out, he said, we're going to assume that you're in breach of contract and be filing a lawsuit in federal court. There was about a 12-hour period, and then I got something, again, through the fax machine coming through that my checks were resuming that week. And I got paid, I think it was a little more than 2 years, which was fantastic at the time. Truth be known, I much would rather work for that paycheck. And the week that WCW got sold, I might be a point or two off, but it was something like Vince did like a 7.9 or an 8 point, like in that range. And we did a 5.6, I believe was the rating. So the head-to-head ratings, yeah, they were beating us, but we were still drawing a pretty large crowd. By today's standards, a massive crowd. And even at that time, for other than wrestling, there were very few things on cable that were garnering 5, 6, 7, 8s in the ratings. So when I checked on this like 4 or 5 years ago, in that same time slot, TNT had the best rating they had done was a 1.3, and they'd averaged like a 0.6 or something, like some minuscule number. So clearly, in hindsight, this was a boneheaded move, so much so that it actually elicited a response from Ted Turner. Jamie Kellner, who was running WCW and Time Warner at the time, was having his first board meeting. And the meeting starts and the doors open, and in walks Ted Turner, who has just sold this to Time Warner. So there's an exalted guy in this office building, right? So everybody jumps up and, hey, it's Ted Turner. Nice to see Ted here. And Jamie Kellner, of course, is gushing, right? Hey, Ted Turner's coming to see me take over the company. He walks up with his hand extended to shake hands with Ted Turner, and Ted puts his finger in his face and says, you ever get rid of another piece of this company that I personally brought to it, I'll personally see you don't work in this industry again. And turned and walked out. Boneheaded move for the network, boneheaded move for Time Warner. And I would suggest that being at a 5.6 hardly meant that we were on our knees and out of the game, like we were out of ideas. We had a very talented locker room. Again, the MBA courses being taught on how not to run a company. If they would have just done the right thing. And this is like, again, I can't even point the finger at any one person and say this person this or this person that. There was just so much confusion. You'd get to the TV taping, and all week you'd been talking to people on the phone, saying, okay, you're going to match this week with James. 10 minutes and, you up. Okay, good. So I'm coming up with ideas. And I'd get there and I'd see Shane Douglas versus Taz, or who I was plugging a name in there. Oh, wait, I thought it was James. Oh, it was, but and then you see like Kevin Nash come in at times, need to race, just sort of glance at the board and erase matches off and then write other matches in. And there was this feeling that like, who's in charge? Like, is Kevin in charge? Is Kevin Sullivan in charge? Is Vince Russo in charge? Is Bischoff in charge? Is anybody in charge? And it really just became, the dog circling to grab his own tail. And no company can succeed like that. But the 5.6, had anybody stepped in, if Jamie Kennedy stepped in and said, okay, WCW, enough of the bullshit, get this fixed, get it in a direction, get it okayed and do it. That would take leadership. And it's just a whole lot easier to sell it for pennies on the dollar.
Am I going crazy here? Or was it like Henry Rollins or someone like that was like briefly on WCW's booking committee, like some musician who turned up?
I think so, yes.
Was it Henry Rollins?
I believe so. It's funny you said that because it was just popping into my head. And as soon as you said the name, like every time I see him I could watch a lot of documentaries and stuff, and I'll see him and I'm like, I know I've met him somewhere. And then, but I'm pretty sure it was Henry Rollins, but there were others too. There was a, what the hell was the name of the group?
Misfits.
Bald guy.
No.
Well, the Misfits, they were involved, but like on camera.
Yeah.
But there was somebody from like one of those, like, I don't want to say grunge or punk, like one of those, what the hell? It's right at the tip of my tongue. And like, so when Billy Corgan started coming around wrestling, it just sort of fit, like, because these people were always sort of dabbling around. But there was a guy on the booking committee, bald head and glasses, that was in one of those groups at the time in the 90s. It was fairly big. And I can't, 10 minutes after we've done recording, it'll pop into my head. But he was on the booking meeting. Yeah, Rollins was there at some point. There's a lot of this. And it was, I guess the acumen was, well, like Billy Corgan, he's a great musician, right? Writes great songs. Should make a great booker.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like, I love Billy's music. Does that mean I should, like, I'm waiting for Billy to call me so he and I can sit down and write a hit album? Because, and I don't mean to be like condescending like that, but how offended would he be if I called him, hey, Billy, I've been waiting for you to call me, and I got some great ideas for an album. I've never recorded an album in my life. My son already talks light years beyond like my musicianship. I'm sure he would take that offensively. Hey, dude, like, you think it's easy to write? If it were easy, everybody would do it, right? And well, we take it the same way. There's somebody coming in. I don't care how accomplished you are in another field. To suddenly come in and say, well, hey, I'm here and it's going to be great. Nothing against any of those guys. You have to know wrestling in order to be able to write wrestling.
Henry Rollins. Anyway, what did you say before? They teach classes in universities how not to run a business and use WCW as the example. Listen, we are going to shut down the podcast now. Thank you very much for sending your questions in from 9 months ago.
Yes.
Next Q&A we do, I promise we'll have some fresh questions and we will solicit them and we'll figure out a way of doing that. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Shane, do you want to do the outro or shall I do it?
No, I'll do it. Hey, appreciate everybody tuning in to Franchise University and learning a little bit more wisdom. But now it's class dismissed.